What is going on, everybody? We are back today for another Rapid Fire Live, where we do rapid fire feature, rapid fire fun, rapid fire content, and rapid fire coaching. We just wrapped our rapid fire community coaching session a minute ago, which has been a growing group, a growing community, and an amazing opportunity to elevate and empower those around us. So if you want any information on how to get in there, we had individuals from our community who jumped right in, but new entrants. We are right now giving a promotion for people to come in and have 2 sessions for free. This is our solution where we want no barrier of entry due to cost. And we're applying a lot of the concepts that we deploy in our intensive one-to-one clients in a broad group to also be able to rapid fire answer their questions, get them moving, get their pains healed, get their layers shed, and allow them to get back to the core of who they are to attract and receive and impact those who they want to impact. So I'm really excited that we just wrapped with that. And I'm even more excited about the first guest that we have today. I'm always going to mispronounce his last name. And so I'm going to let him be the one to say it. But Sam is an individual that I got to meet not long ago. Instantly, we had a connection. Instantly, we were operating at the same vibration and frequency. And instantly, we saw the opportunity for collective impact because of the consistency with how we view the world and how we view people. Sam is an individual, he's known as, I think his organization is literally called the Philosophical Coach. And when I met him, what I really appreciated was the depth of knowledge he had in understanding who we are as human beings, the human experience from the spiritual, philosophical realm. 17 years he was at the University of Oxford and London School of Economics. And he is just a phenomenal human being. So before I go any further, I'm going to bring Sam up and I'll let him tell you who he is. And we'll take it from there for the feature today. What's up, brother, man?
Brian, it's so great to see you, man.
Thank you so as much. Well. Thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, man, it's absolutely my pleasure.
So I gave a little bit of an intro as it relates to how I see you, but I don't ever want the world to just see you the way I see you. I'd love if you could tell everyone who you are, my friend.
Sure, absolutely. So in a nutshell, I have a vision around creating a world that works for everyone. And what that looks like is shifting the trajectory of what law and politics and media and mental health look like in my lifetime and beyond. And, you know, Brian is someone who I see as a partner in that game because he's here out to impact 1 billion lives. And I already see the kind of impact that Brian's making from the year since we first met. So it's extraordinary, man, to see what you're doing and the impact you're making. I just want to acknowledge you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's not happening alone. It's happening with collective impact with a lot of amazing people around me. So I will accept that and receive that. But also part of the reason that you're here, my friend, because of who you are. I'm really fascinated. What got you started on this journey to not just become the philosophical coach, but to really dive deep into the dark workings of who we are as human beings?
Yeah, I think it takes going to the bottom of the soul, if you like, where things don't go the way you expected in life, or like the pathway that you thought that was going to be is kind of like pulled out, like the rug's pulled out essentially. And it's like, okay, now what? Now I have to grapple with all the identity which I've constructed or seem to have and figure out who am I beneath that or with that or discarding that. And that's basically, on top of the existing layer of looking at the human condition by that time already for 8 years. So it was just like, oh shit, like philosophy can actually be way more useful than I ever knew. Like we don't just have to live in this sort of conceptual realm where it's only in an ivory tower, people can understand this. Like we can actually get to the root of like what it is to be human and then actually apply it in a way which allows us to live lives we love. And that was not something that I'd seen before purely in the philosophical realm. Before it was just like, oh, okay, it's a pretty miserable existence to be human. There's a lot of fallibility about being human. And as a consequence of that, we're always going to have the same problems in politics and law. Whereas now it's like, oh, what if we just rewrote the script? What if we throw away whatever doesn't work and just create from there?
So I think that's beautiful. What I also really enjoy is that you said getting to the root of what makes us human beings. One of the things that we talk a lot about, and you've heard this, we've talked about it, right, is getting to the root of the emotional triggers that keep us stuck. What I'm fascinated is I believe that, by the way, those can often be the same thing. The root of the emotional triggers and the root of who we are as human beings are very integrated. But I'd be fascinated to understand the lessons that you've been able to extract in all of your time in this space on helping individuals actually get to the root. Because it sounds great in concept, but getting people there can be a challenge. So for the listeners today, what have you learned and what can they glean from your wisdom?
Yeah, so it's a really simple idea. Like you know the idea that whatever you resist persists. And if you apply that to the realm of the emotions, you get into the territory of like experiencing your experience. So what we want to do generally in life is we want to avoid things where we feel uncomfortable, where we feel something in our gut or in our throat or whatever. We do whatever we can to not feel those feelings. And what I've been doing more and more in the last few months is seeing what's possible when you actually experience the experience, when you experience the emotion. And in the work that I'm doing now with people, like, just give you a kind of an example of what's possible. I was working with someone recently and they had been diagnosed with complex PTSD, done 20 years of therapy. And we did a 40-minute session, which was basically around both my coaching approach combined with energy healing. And what happened was it lifted, she said, more than anything had happened in 20 years of therapy. And I asked, is this who would you recommend this to? She said, anyone who's gone through trauma or PTSD. And he said, is this a pathway to be free of, trauma and PTSD? She said, absolutely. I've tried so many things on my own. I tried therapy as well. That didn't make the difference. Whereas this, and we do it without a lot of story as well. Like it doesn't re-trigger the person, right? Because in that situation, the person was just reliving the situation over and over again. She said up to 20 times a day. So if you can get them to experience their experience rather than having to avoid it, rather than trying to resist it anymore, then you can process that emotion once and for all. Because what emotion wants is to be acknowledged. It wants to be accepted and it wants to be loved. If you don't accept and you don't love it, it's just going to keep coming back. It's like, hey, just someone fucking notice me.
It's a fact. It's a fact. And the reality of it is that if we actually pay attention to this, you've heard me say it, we must feel in order to heal. And, it's interesting. There've been a lot of people who've asked me over the years, they say, okay, so what's the difference between therapy and coaching around this type of stuff? And I want to first honor what you just said is very real. And I want to honor the fact that there are many incredible therapists that are out there. So anything I say here is not to take away from the depth and the importance of that work. There are many, though, that are very good at getting to the root of what has caused the patterns in people's lives, but many keep them there, right? It's a never-ending, consistent questions of why. Well, why do I have this? Why am I experiencing this? Why does it go back? And there's, I believe, only so many why questions you can ask before you just perpetually keep circling the same drain. And so instead, I think that therapy is really effective at uncovering it. And there's many qualified therapists that actually know how to make people move through it. So again, I'm saying this with absolute respect for the space. But often what I find in coaching is we are very focused in objectivity and future focused. How do we actually help people move? How do we help them heal so that this isn't something that's creating the same pattern in their lives? And so often I say, we're asking what questions instead of why. What lessons did I extract from this? How do I become intentional in applying this moving forward? Right? Like, and really shifting from a place of power, because I believe we must feel in order to heal. And I have had multiple experiences with individual clients like that you've talked about, who for 30 years, 20 years, 15 years carried something, did decades of therapy, but yet they never actually felt that what they desired was possible. What I'm fascinated with, and you even said, I want to show you what's possible. How do you show your clients what they believe is impossible is actually very possible?
I don't think I have to do a lot to show it, to be honest, Brian. I think they bring it forth for themselves in the way that they're willing to be courageous and not just get insight around, because if you just get insight around something and then you do nothing with it, nothing's going to transform. You could even do that with an emotion and you could process the emotion. But if you just think you're going to just, sit there and everything's just going to, be bliss abundance, you're mistaken.
Right.
So what I find is that once people see the possibility, 99 times out of 100, they're going to just be like, oh, I have a choice now. Like, I thought I only had the way of living life this way. And now I can see this other way. I want that way. And I just pull it towards me. And a lot of them say how effortless it is because they can see it and it wasn't a possibility before. And now they can listen to themselves in a way which allows that possibility to be real. And I think probably the biggest aspect of what I do with people is I listen for their greatness. So I speak into that, and I will never speak into something below that, because if people are always dealing with their own self-judgment more than we're dealing with any other judgment there is. And so given that's a fact about being human, we're never going to escape the inconstancy of our judgment. The fact that one moment we're like, oh my God, I'm at the top of the world. The next moment, like, oh, how could I think I could do this, right? The bigger the vision, the more you're going to have those kinds of thoughts. So given that, what can you do? All right, so I'm only going to speak into your highest vibration. Sometimes that looks like a commitment to your life where it's going to penetrate through your soul. Other times it's going to be almost sweet and it's going to be vulnerable. But whatever is going to be needed to speak into that highest vibration to bring that forth, that's what I'll do with them.
I think that's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And I love that you are really effectively being a mirror for them to see themselves more clearly. I describe myself very, very similarly. You know, recently we had people asking us, they said, hey, we really want you to define emotional triggers because we talk a lot about it. And so I came up with a string of words. I'd really just love your opinion on it, frankly. Yeah. I said, triggers are unprocessed and unrooted prior events that develop patterns causing us to project feelings and emotions into the present.
Sounds pretty spot on, man.
So often what I find too with dealing with trauma is that it really creates this lens that we view the world through, often which isn't true. Right? Our autonomic nervous system, our fight or flight gets us into a place where we're so armored and so protected over time that we choose to only see the world that way. Unconscious choice more often than not. What I often say about triggers is they're typically not our fault, but they become our responsibility when we can bring them into a place of conscious awareness so we can become intentional with them. What I'm curious about with you, and even what you just said a second ago, we are all human beings. And we will always be impacted by this. I've dealt with shame at a deep level. I've dealt with anger at a deep level. And what I tell all my clients is that these will be adversaries in constant pursuit until the day that I die. The goal is to allow myself to recognize and become aware as much as possible so that the damage and the impact and the amount of time I exist in that space gets reduced incrementally the more intentional I am about bringing it into conscious awareness and breaking those old patterns and habits. But I will always be triggered by shame. I will always be triggered by anger. And so do I deal with imposter syndrome, even though I'm out there empowering people to do this? Yes, right? I know the same exists for you. And so if you wouldn't mind sharing to be able to demonstrate the human side of you, right? Yeah. Like, how have you been affected by the types of work that you do in your own life?
Oh, like every week. Like, you know, like literally there'll be like, you know, there'll be days where I'm just in complete flow. And I'll be like, you know, nothing can stop me. And then, you know, you might wake up the next morning and then just for whatever reason, something's triggered you, or you just, and I'm not in that level of flow. And then I'm like, oh, God, I need to get the momentum back. And what I had a realization about yesterday about a momentum is like when you're trying to figure out how to get momentum back, you're likely never to get momentum back.
Yeah, so true. That's right? Beautiful. That was great.
Processing the fact, like, okay, where is it located in my body that I'm not experiencing momentum? Like, what's the feeling there? And if I can process that emotion, then I'm much more likely to be able to bring the momentum back quickly.
Yeah, I'm a big believer as well. And again, I'd like your take on this because you talk this way, you act this way, and you interact this way. So I believe that one of the things you also help people with is I believe we've lost the art of thinking and feeling in this world. We know this, right? The world tells us literally not to feel in many, many respects. But I think it's deeper than that. You know, we've got this thinking, feeling quadrant that we walk people through because I believe it's more than just thinking and feeling. I think we've got to put ourselves into an intentional place to be able to think about our thinking, think about our feeling, feel our thinking, and feel our feeling. And it's in that quadrant that success can live by us understanding who we are best because we get intellectual narratives, we get emotional narratives, and they both lie to us. And so what I'd be fascinated about is, yes, this is a framework that we guide people through. You've talked a lot about allowing ourselves to feel. You've talked about relating and rewriting new narratives. Yeah. So as it relates to the dynamic of connecting the head to the heart, how do you typically guide and advise people to start to create that connection within themselves?
Yeah. So probably a different answer if I was talking about someone outside of working with them directly. But if I'm working with someone directly, I'm going to basically get them to go, well, I'm going to talk to them about getting out of their mind. You know, one of the biggest lessons for me is like we are not our mind. So if we can create that as a possibility, like, oh, I'm not my mind, the brain's just a predictive system and it's bringing forth more and more of what it expects, then I say, all right, what do I want to create instead if I wasn't my mind? And if I could drop out of that and just drop into the body instead, imagine that is what is stopping you from getting into the playfulness if you're a serious person, the joy if you feel like life is really constraining. That's what I'm finding more and more at the moment, is that if you allow someone to take the time, and I always will talk to them about like having all the time in the world in those sessions, because if people feel like, oh no, I've got to get somewhere quickly, things should be otherwise quickly, then they're more likely to get back into their head. So it's really guiding them to experience all the sensations which are going on, not trying to change anything about it, because we're so good at human beings. We just want to change things, want to fix it. There's nothing to fix. Allow them to really get like whatever you're experiencing is perfect. It doesn't have to feel that way, but whatever you're experiencing in this moment, if you're listening, is perfect. And if you can allow that possibility that it's perfect as it is, not try and change anything about it, but just be curious about that experience, then a new realm is possible, because then you're starting to stimulate the norepinephrine, which takes you from the anxiety and fear to the excitement and curiosity. And that's where the place for creativity is stimulated from.
I love that. What you basically just said is that you're trying to get people to be the observer and the participant in their lives real time. Yeah. Right. And I think that that's what so many of us desire, but feel so far away. I view you as a little bit of a visionary in this space. And I know that you and I've talked about this a little bit. What is your vision for the future? And what is the legacy that you want to leave with the body of work that I know you're creating in this lifetime, in this physical embodiment of the vehicle that you exist in today?
Yeah. So, I'm looking, if I start off with like the next couple of years, what I'm looking to do is create a center for the transformation of law and politics. And the basic idea is, if we look at the existing operating system in law and politics, it's based on at least 17th, 18th century concepts. So we're relying on that kind of thinking to get us to where the future is. It's like the idea, what got us here is not going to get us there, wherever there is. So given that all this kind of emotional healing work can allow people to drop into their, heart center and peace center, and what is often in law and politics is an othering of people, if you could create something which is not just about great leadership, not just about taking full responsibility and being effective, but also dropping into the heart, dropping into the getting, like, we are just a blue, we're just a tiny speck on a blue planet. And if you're, the astronaut looking down at Earth, boundaries disappear for them a lot of the time. They have these perspectival shifts where they're no longer looking at, oh, that's Africa, that's New Orleans. No, they're like, why are there wars? Why is this fighting? So my thought process is, if you are able to work with all the political leaders, then you can shift the way that they think, not just think, but also their emotions. So that would be the starting point. And then around, media, you've got to shift the narrative there, because at the moment, people think the news is something to avoid. And that seems crazy. Like, tens of millions of people, are going to be watching that every day or getting information. We should create that as an empowering conversation. There are so many empowering conversations like what you're doing. Why isn't that going to be more at the forefront? So that would be the third part. And the final part would be to shift the conversation around mental health, from mental health being a problem where everything is seen as a disorder, where there's chaos as a consequence of that, to this is all part of being human. These are all states of being. They're all feelings which have a persistent state, which then in turn is what leads to label. So if we shift from that way of thinking and just like, okay, what do I actually want to create in my life, rather than focus on the emotion, focus on the anxiety, focus on the depression, focus even on the trauma. Focus on what you want to create, you can actually pull that towards you without having to necessarily feel all that stuff constantly without avoiding it at the same time. So that's kind of the vision.
I love that. Again, part of the reason you're here, brother, because I just love your heart. I love your mission. I love your focus. You just said something that brought back a comment for me. So, obviously these are very organic conversations. So I'm going to take it here for a second, because I just want to respond, I think, to one word that you chose, and not from a negative or challenge perspective, but a perspective. Okay.
Absolutely.
I am somebody that inherently has been labeled my whole life, right? Because of my situation, I got tired of being defined through the lens of what other people wanted for me. So I created my own label, right? And I don't mean that as a negative thing. I created a negative narrative that impacted me, but the label around recognizing that I do have an arm that's different. I fit into the category of likely having a physical disability, though I don't view myself as disabled, right? And the power of that label also exists by, are other people putting it on me, or am I owning the label based on what I know exists for me? Where this is going is my son's on the autism spectrum. I've talked about this a lot. And there's a lot in the United States around getting services for kids that have special needs in a public school system and going through a process to make sure that they get the identifications and get the support that they need in their school. Now, this is dating back a few years ago now. We got this all handled. But in the conversation, about 3 hours in, we knew that getting the autism classification meant more for him in the support in schools than not. And what the teachers at the time said to us was, we really don't want to give that to him because we don't want your son to have a label associated with him through the whole course of school. And in that environment, I immediately responded back and I said, if he carries a label that has a negative impact in school, that's your problem, not mine. Right? I actually, from our standpoint, we got our son diagnosed at 4. Him being on the spectrum is a part of who he is. It's not a negative thing. It's a neurological difference in processing, which means that he sees the world differently, receives the world differently, and has social elements to it. And so what's interesting is that we have these classifications under the definition of mental health that come across as labels or negative versus complete ownership for the fact that we're just different. And these labels in some way can also be a tool if we can create the empathy and compassion to allow ourselves to understand each other better. Knowing who someone is on the autism spectrum gives me a different way of interacting with them because I now have the knowledge on what that means for the way they may interact. Although one person on the spectrum is one person on the spectrum, but it at least gives me an indicator. So I'd just be fascinated from your perspective on how do we take the typical negative connotation around certain labels and shift that as a society where labels can actually be empowerment and connection.
I think the simple answer is it all comes down to agreement. So we've looked at what's happened in the last few years from the mental illness is what mental health was about. And so that created the stigma around talking about mental health. Now there's been a sort of a separation between that. So like everyone has mental health. And then everyone starts to, use that label in a way which can be empowering, although it can still be disempowering if the conversation is only used in a negative sense of like, I'm struggling, I have mental health, right? So I think when you're talking about, and I think the example you use around your son is beautiful and perfect. And I can see the value of the label for understanding how to communicate with someone. And, people do use labels as a source of empowerment. And I would never want to say like, if it's empowering for someone, that's great. Right. They've got to choose what's empowering for them. What we don't want to do is to say that there's something wrong as a consequence. What I don't like is the language of disorder, because that suggests there's something almost unhuman or chaotic necessarily. And I know that with the autism spectrum, they can talk about like the experience of in the brain can be kind of chaotic, but I think there's a chaos in most people's lives anyway, to be honest.
There is.
And it just, their chaos looks like may just be different to ours. And,
I agree with that completely. Yeah, so I agree with that completely. I love how you said that, Sam. I often say that autism has only given me a window to understand what most of us experience internally, what it looks like when it comes out, right? Because there's not a filter there. And when anxiety hits and the demands of their environment exceed their ability to cope, which is no different than any of us in other scenarios, right? We see it come out in a behavioral or physical manifestation way. And so I think it's something that can be empowering and can connect. So I love how you said that. Again, I also think another interesting thing that I would just love your take on is I sometimes get resistance to the concept of putting everything in the bucket of mental health, which implies that it's all just in our head, that it's all a mental game, when we actually know that there's physiological and emotional health reasons that contribute to what we put into the bucket of mental health. I don't think that mental health is as all-inclusive as the things that actually affect all of us. And so knowing that that's a term that we've both used and we both use interchangeably often, right? Yeah. How do we potentially allow people to have a more holistic view of what mental health is? Or how do we change the language so that we can understand more holistically what we're actually dealing with.
Well, it's funny you said that. I saw a creator today, George Bell, who's like a big voice around mental health, was saying like there's so many different forms of health, and we put everything in that bucket. Rather than emotional health, social health, financial health. Like there are so many different kinds of health. Wow. And like there's going to be a relationship with the mind, but there's also a relationship with the emotions. So I think you're right. It can be often unhelpful to put everything in the category of mental health, especially if we understand it as a negative, as it tends to be commonly, but not, I'm sure there is exceptions. And, we still have people creating new labels, right? Mental fitness, mental wealth, to try and accommodate the fact that like, we don't want everything to be seen in this kind of lens. So again, I think it comes down to the languaging of it, and to see like, if we can strip away from, one of the big lessons I learned in a consulting role was, we want to look at the fine grainness of the experience itself. If you look at the concept, it's only, you can't actually transform anything, because you're creating such a level of generality that everything just falls into the same bucket.
Yes. Beautifully stated, my friend. I really enjoy you. I love the way you experience the world. I love how thoughts, feelings, emotions flow through you. I love how they get communicated, and I love the resonance that comes with everything you speak. So thank you very much. You've got a course coming out, I believe, in October. Do you want to let everybody know a little bit about what that looks like and how they might be able to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, on the Philosophical Coach website, there's a course called Creating a Joyful Life. And essentially the idea is a lot of what we're talking about with Brian here, where rather than focusing on this idea of the depression or the anxiety or the trauma or any kind of experience around mental health, which is disempowering, it's like, what if we just focus on what you actually want to create in life and bring that forth instead? So just to give you a very quick example, working with someone recently, they, before they met me, they were dealing with panic attacks, kind of bent over in their kitchen, worst career day. 2 months later, they decided, okay, I can quit this job. They're now in their dream job. And they're, within 2 months, like, oh my God, my husband's like, I've got my wife back. The relationship with their friends is altered. The relationship with their parents is altered. So there is no limit to what's possible within this space. And that's basically what it's about.
I love that, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us today. I can't wait to talk to you again soon. And everybody who's watching, please, please, please go follow Sam. He's putting a lot of goodness into the world. The way he thinks, the way he feels, the way he processes information, and the way he's effective at holding a mirror up for others to see themselves more clearly with actual understanding at the depths of his soul on how to help evolve and transform your soul is what's going to bring you into the world. So Sam, thank you so much, brother. We'll talk soon, okay?
Thank you so much, Brian. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to talking again soon.
All right, man. All right, everybody. So that is going to be a wrap for today. We did have another guest, but we ended up using a little bit of the time to go longer with Sam as they needed to pivot. Again, we did our rapid fire community coaching program today with big success. Text rapid fire to 602-704-5189 or shoot me a DM with the keywords rapid fire if you're interested in getting more information on how to get in that. I'm offering 2 free sessions in this community. And this is also something that's only $44 a month for multiple Zoom sessions where we're going over exclusive content and we're helping get your questions answered. We had a phenomenal session this morning. It's continuing to grow and build. And I would love to have any one of you be able to elevate and empower yourself so that you can be moved to move more people, because move people move people. And on our mission to impact over 1 billion lives as collectively as possible, I just want you to also be a part of the collective impact. Feel free to jump in there. And until next week, next time, when we come back for rapid fire, be great.